Hi everyone, I'm Sebastiano Armeli, and I'm one of the engineering managers working at Spotify in New York City. So I manage a group of web engineers within the monetization department at Spotify, the free monetization, which means ads. So when you listen to ads within Spotify, it's because of my team, probably. So sorry about that. So this talk is about my story from switching from a senior software engineer role to an engineering manager role. I'm going to describe some good patterns I find, bad practices, activities that we usually do, and specifically things we do at Spotify. I was actually, a year and a half ago, I was on this stage as a senior engineer talking about JavaScript. So this stage is pretty familiar. So as I said, like a couple of years ago, this was the code I was writing. It was something like this, which is, I don't know if you're familiar, is JavaScript is ES6 is the new version of JavaScript. I was part of a team. I was doing lots of pair programming, working on TDD, BDD, a big fan of especially pairing and sharing knowledge with people in the team. So I was what we call developers, engineers, programmers, and then when you become a manager, you call them individual contributors. And then, so basically the kind of a relationship that you have to manage are with your peers, with other ICs, and with your manager. So like two-way relationship. And then one day what happened is that since I was very interested in team dynamics and organizational changes, mentorship, I got asked to become an engineering manager. So I said, yes, I'll try it. I'll try learning new things. I think engineering manager is a skill that you can learn. So what happened is I became the boss of like my peers. And clearly, dynamics in the team changes because you are the guy that can fire them. You're the guy that decides their salary. So it was a pretty, I mean, it was subtle, but it was a big change. And now I had to manage three types of relationships. So I had to manage a relationship with my peers, which are other managers, my boss, in this case the director, and my reports, other ICs, developers. So it becomes starts becoming more complicated. But let's look in details what really changed when you become an engineering manager. First of all, meetings overflow. That's something that, I don't know how many of you are engineering managers or directors, but you're basically involved 80% of your time or 60% of your time in meetings. And you discuss different things, from one-on-ones to strategy about hiring, strategy about product, meetings about improvements around the company, around the office, around the specific area. So for example, I'm still managing web engineers, so you're involved in the web strategy within the New York office. So you're definitely overloaded of meetings. Second thing that changes is that I call it async conversations. I guess this comes more from my background, since I used to be like a JavaScript developer. Anyway, if you're not familiar with JavaScript, there is this concept of event loop in JavaScript, where you basically take things, but you don't. It's basically a loop that gets things but doesn't execute and get the response straight away. Basically, you get the response asynchronously. So basically the same thing for an engineering manager. You you're involved in lots of conversations, and often those conversations can be resolved straight away. So for example, say that someone has got an issue and you have to follow up on a certain problem. Or say that someone needs a phone, like a very basic thing. You need to ask IT and like order a phone. So there is all things that like can be solved immediately. And there are different ways to approach those kind of problems and items you have to do. Personally, I keep just an Evernote note with all the things I have to do at the beginning of the week, and then another one for the day, and I just add things, and then I delete them once I complete on that item. But other people use Trello boards. There are different approaches. But I think the most interesting part here is that definitely often you are involved in lots of small things that you can really complete immediately. The third thing that really changed was working with uncertainty. So when you're a developer, you basically know exactly what you're doing, and like you know the code that you write, you review code from other people, and you know exactly pretty much the classes that you build. When you're a manager, most of the cases, yeah, you review PRs, but you don't write code. So you have to rely on what people tell you, or what you read, or what other managers say. So you work with this kind of uncertainty. You're not 100% the person that built something. And that was like I think that's one of the things that people struggle when they move into a management position. And another thing that I really struggled at the beginning was the feedback loop that is definitely longer when you're a manager. When you're an engineer, you write tests and you know straight away, or you just run your code and you know straight away if it works or not, right? When you're a manager, you make a change, or you decide something. Say you hire an engineer, you move someone to a different team, you decide on a certain strategy. The result of your actions are not immediate. They're not like in 2 seconds, in 5 minutes, you know the results. It takes weeks, months. And the more you go up in the management ladder, and the more this time gets longer. So imagine CEO, when they make decisions, the effect of those decisions take months. For engineering managers, they might take weeks or months, or a few weeks. But in general, it's all about people. It's not more about code. It's more about people. You deal with conflict management, with people problems. People come to you. They tell you their problems, their conflicts with other people. And you basically find enjoyment from being the person that your team trusts, and you feel like enjoyment for like making other people succeed. Whereas before, your main enjoyment was more on what you really build than like the code that you write. And like finding a smart solution, that's what really excites you. Now let's talk about more the specific activities that usually an engineering manager does. First of all, hiring. Hiring, I find, is the most important thing that a manager can do at every level. If you have a team which is really solid, it's more likely you're going to succeed. Look at soccer teams, for example. I don't know if you watch soccer, but clearly if you have a team which have got like very good team players and very good players, probably your team has good chances to succeed. If you fill your team with bad players, can be a struggle. So hiring is definitely the main activity you can do. And we call it cultural interviews. That's what engineering managers do. You have an hour with a person. You have to find out the way that this person works, the way that this person can interact with the team. You have to think of how can this person can fit in a team, with other people. I personally manage like multiple people across multiple teams. So when I hire someone, when I interview someone, I have to think, oh, this person, this personality can fit with a couple of people I got in that team or other people I've got in another team. So it's definitely like, it's very crucial that aside from the mastery part, the technical side, you evaluate if this person can fit in your team. Because it can be like a massive effect in the development process. And definitely another thing that like, especially now we care about, but super important is diversity. When you hire in a team, it's important you consider to have a diverse team, which doesn't mean only gender, race, sexual orientation. It means also like the way that a person behaves in a team. So they're all things that you need to consider in a way that you build teams that are very, they can produce innovation and have different ideas. So hiring, but also firing, let people go. That's another thing that is super important, because if you have someone that is really negative in your team, you have to be brave enough and fire the person, not because you don't like the person personally, but it's mostly because it's got an effect on the team. Another main activities, I guess, if you're an engineering manager, you basically do is one-on-ones. One-on-ones are super important because they create connection with your report. I personally like doing weekly one-on-ones, but then depends on the case. I go like depends on the report, but you really find in this half an hour with your report the connection, because you really are only you and him. You can ask personal questions, you can ask things about the team, and I think that's super important here, the questions that you ask. I think the best managers are the ones that ask smart questions and questions that get information out of your reports. Because at the end of the day, if you really try to empower people and avoid to micromanage people, you have to ask the right information and get all the information you can from those one-on-ones. Usually the type of information I ask in one-on-ones are like priorities for the week coming up, and usually I let people go and like tell me like their priorities, and then like if I've got other ideas on what they have to do, like we discuss about it. Career development, which doesn't happen all the time, but it's super important. I guess it's one of the main things that we do as managers, is caring about the progress of a person in his career. And then feedback. Once a month, I usually give feedback to people. I gather feedback from other people about the person, and also I like getting feedback for myself. I know it's a bit of sometimes a bit difficult to get feedback, honest feedback from your reports, because they won't tell you all the truth, but like if you have to try to create an environment where you basically can be transparent and can be a feedback both ways. In other ongoing activities, aside from one-on-ones, is caring about employee engagement. I think engineers typically are like very self-motivated, but still each engineer gets motivated by different things. So let's say, I don't know, in my experience, typically a senior engineer needs to be motivated by complex problems, by having always big challenges and complex problems to solve. Whereas junior engineers wants to learn, likes to pair with a senior engineer and learn on a daily basis. In terms of employee engagement, at Spotify, what we are lately using is this tool called Office Vibe. I'm not sure how many of you have seen it. So basically, it works through pulse surveys. So pulse surveys are basically surveys that happen every week or with a certain cadence, and are emails that basically Office Vibe sends an employee and asks about feedback about a manager or like a certain metrics like career development or company alignment. So for example, you ask here, how do you feel at the moment? Rate from 1 to 10. And then we get basically those results in reports, and we can compare in different teams how the engagement goes for employees. If you haven't looked at this tool, it's pretty cool. I mean, there are a few out there, like Tiny Polls is another one. The main concept is getting continuous feedback from your employee and acting on it. That's the other big thing. Like, aside from getting data, you need to act on that, and also showing the team the results. Another activity that managers do, not on a daily basis, but more every 6 months or a year, is performance and compensation review, which are two different things. Performance review is about sitting down with your report and basically go through his performance, getting feedback from other people, summarizing the top 3 things that he's doing well, the top 3 things that you could improve on. Compensation review is about talking about money, so like the increase of salary. But specifically, let's look at more at what an engineering manager does at Spotify. So we call it chapter lead. So I'm a chapter lead, for example. So I manage people within different teams with the same technical affinity. So web engineers in different teams within the monetization tribe, which is the department. Typically, the size of a chapter goes from 5 to 15. My chapter is 12. I think the right size is probably 7 or 8. Already 12 is a bit of a stretch. So a chapter lead typically wears different hats. So at Spotify, typically, the role is, aside from the people management part, there is also a flexibility part. You can still be a coder, you can act as an agile coach, you can act as a product owner in some cases, you can act as a technical owner in other cases. So it's a very flexible role. And but we at Spotify, we really believe in a couple of concepts as a managers. First of all, we believe in growth mindset. So we believe that people can learn anything if they put in the work, practice and effort to learn it. So people basically can always learn a skill and can improve. And the way that you can improve on, we measure it using this thing called tech steps. So if you decide to stay in the engineering path and you don't want to switch into management, we basically created this kind of a ladder where you can move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Similar thing as Google, Facebook have, nothing really new, but we basically, what we do is we associate each step with the level of influence that you have. So say that you're at step 1, you basically influence yourself as a IC. If you're at step 2, you're basically you have an impact on the squad, on the team you work on. If you're at step 3, you're basically having influence on all the tribe, on all the department. So that's the way that we basically define those tech steps. Another concept that I think a manager believes on is the way that we motivate people. We believe that you can motivate people based on autonomy, mastery, and purpose, mostly purpose. So giving a purpose to people definitely helps people understanding, getting them motivated. And when I say purpose, it's basically about connecting what people are doing on a daily basis with the company bets, the company priorities. So if you create that connection, people understand the real purpose on what they're doing. So say that I don't know, someone is working on, I don't know, creating a new ad format on a mobile client, if we're able to connect that with our company strategy, which is about pushing ad formats on mobile, because we believe that 80% of our ad revenue in 2016 will come from mobile, then people understand why we are building an ad format and why they're writing that specific code on a mobile client. So now, next thing, let's talk about some good practices that I found as engineering managers, or things that I believe there are practices a good manager should follow. And I'm not saying that I do those things. I'm still learning, and I'm far from being great at all those things. But definitely the first thing an engineering manager or a manager in general should be good at is time management. As I said before, you are involved in lots of conversation, you have lots of meetings. So if you have lots of meetings, you have to be able to manage your time in a smart way. Because often you have a meeting from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., another one from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., and maybe you have an hour from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., which is free, and you have to use that time in a very impactful way, in a way that is very efficient. So the more you're good at managing your time and making your time impactful, the better it is. Empathy, having empathy, that's key. Basically understanding how people feel and why people think in a certain way, that's definitely a key skill if you're a good manager. Often, like you have an ego, when you're in conversation, when you're in discussion, sometimes you have the tendency to be defensive. But good managers always think about what the other person feels and how and why the other person feels in that way. And that's basically empathy. Attracting people, senior engineers or other managers, that's a very important skill. As I said before, hiring is super important, is key. So being able to attract people, being able to have people that want to work with you, that's definitely a key skill for a good manager. Decision-making. As I said before, sometimes you have to hire, you have to fire people, they're all decisions. So you have to be able to make those decisions. Sometimes can be tough, sometimes can be difficult, but you're definitely a decision maker. But also you have to balance being a decision maker with being a decision enabler. So you have a team that you probably need to trust. As I said before, you work with uncertainty. So you don't know exactly anymore how a specific piece of code works. So you have to trust the people in your team that basically they know better the code than you, that the decisions they make are correct. You should try to stay out from those decisions possibly and trust the team. So you need to enable people to make those decisions. But the way that you do that is through trust and through good hires. If you don't make a good hire, you don't have trust, and you can't enable people to make decisions. Multitasking. Again, as I said before, async conversations. So you have to deal with multiple tasks and multiple meetings, multiple things to do. But I believe that busy is a bug, not a feature. So I usually, when people ask me, are you busy? I try to say no, especially if a reporter of mine asks me, because I believe you have to be always available for people, for a chat, or for if they want to ask you something. I don't think having someone that believes that you are always busy is a good thing, because you have to always, as a manager, especially with your reports, being available and always give the impression that they can talk to you for anything. As a good manager, you always have to have a tactical think. You have to be a tactical thinker and a strategical thinker. So a tactical thinker basically means that you think about like operational things. So say that you want to move someone from a team to another one, that's more about a tactic. Where a strategy is more like a long-term vision. So say that we decide to move different architecture within the client, or say that we change the strategy in the way we hire. That's more a strategical thinking and more strategical activities. And I guess the more you, the more you go up in management, the more you're involved in strategical things and less in tactical things. So I remember when I switched to being an engineering manager, definitely I wasn't involved in many strategical things. I was all involved in tactical things, say like moving people here, or like having one-on-ones and fixing the conflict in the team, and But in general, I'm not going through in this topic like management versus leadership, but each manager should strive to be a leader. And a few of the things that I described here, they're like signs of being a leader, like empathy, being a strategical thinker. They're all like part of leadership. But when you're a manager, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're a leader. But at Spotify, we believe that you should strive for being a leader. So we talked about good practices, or like when a manager acts in the right way. But what about when are you a bad manager? Definitely when you micromanage. That's the thing that like when you become a manager, you definitely get it wrong. Because I remember you're used to, write the code and like knowing exactly each line of code, what it does. And now you're in that situation where you have to trust people, and it's hard because you're used to do things. And the tendency of checking on people continuously and micromanage people is very common. But again, like, micromanagement is like definitely a bad thing, especially in our environment where people are really creative and they want to feel the ownership of things and they want to be trusted. Another thing is pretty controversial, but I believe that coding more than 50% of your time is an anti-pattern, or even coding when you're a manager is an anti-pattern. Because if you find yourself coding, means that you don't have time for caring about your employees, for thinking about their career, thinking about a specific conflict, think about hiring properly, think about how you can improve team dynamics. So I don't know, that's a bit controversial. Some people still code as an engineering managers and they do their job well, but I believe that if you want to grow as a manager, you should stop coding. Stressed, definitely if you're a manager, you should avoid being stressed, which is part of what I was saying before about busy is a bug, not a feature. Even if you're stressed in your personal life, you should never show to your reports that you're stressed, because people feel it. Even a small thing that you do as a boss, as a manager, people see it, and then they get distracted from their work. Related to what I was saying before, you should avoid to be a single point of failure. So you should try to delegate as much as you can. Even this one can be controversial, but if you stop coding and if you more focus on the things that are more impactful, you need to avoid being like centralizing everything and being like the point of failure. So saying, for example, you used to be the one that used to make the decisions around the architecture of a certain application, Now, if you become a manager, you can't be that person. You have to delegate that responsibility to someone else. And also, you should avoid having an unhealthy life. I think the more healthy you are, the more happy you are, and the more good energy you can transmit to people in your team. And that's all. I think we have a bit of time for questions. Thanks.
Indeed, you do have a lot of questions. Some of them can be grouped together. First one is, how do you measure your own success as a manager? How do you get feedback yourself?
So yeah, determining success for a manager is pretty challenging. Because I said before, it's not about making a line of code like a test succeed or not.
Yeah, but you measure the success of your people that you manage, not like codes too.
Sure. So the way that we manage success, so I personally manage success, is through the people I manage. So if someone, like for example, moves from step 1 to step 2 or step 3, and I see the progress of the person, definitely is something that I feel like I'm succeeding. If I see someone that is a step 2, or like someone that is not super motivated, gets to work at 12, that's definitely something that I'm doing wrong. Other ways that we use to gather feedback is through this tool I mentioned, Office Vibe, which provides anonymous feedback. So you can provide feedback to your manager or to product owners, and that's definitely a way that is very valuable to get feedback from people. And also one-on-ones. I mean, I always ask people in one-on-ones. I've got a very casual relationship with my reports. I ask them, like, just give me some feedback on myself. And as I said before, it can be challenging because, you're the manager, and it's better to ask in an anonymous context, like with Office Vibe.
How do you keep up with tech now that you're a manager? Should you?
Yeah, I think you should. What I said before, you shouldn't write code, but you should always keep up with tech. I mean, we work in tech. We don't work in in other industry. We don't work in fashion. So I think you should, always read like blogs or like articles talking about, big changes. I don't know, for example, functional programming is a big thing now, or like serverless architecture. Those are things that like you should know. You should know what are about. Probably you shouldn't be an expert in writing Scala, or you shouldn't be knowing everything about Google GCP functions.
I think you should, really. I mean, as far as I know.
Well,
do you miss coding?
Well, at the beginning I used to miss coding. Nowadays, I mean, I prefer more doing other activities than coding.
Like what?
Like hiring people, like seeing people succeeding. That's more rewarding. But definitely at the beginning, yeah, I used to miss coding a lot.
You seem to be pretty young as a manager. How do you handle the fact that some people think you can't have enough experience to manage others? Any advice to young leaders?
Right. I'm not that young. I'm 34.
How old are you? 34?
34 almost. But anyway, I've got white hair. Yeah, sometimes it happens you manage older people than you. Usually the way that I go about managing even more senior than me is a partnership. So you have to trust them, and you have to act in a way that you don't have to make them feel you're their boss, superior. It's a partnership relationship, because they probably in some areas they know more than you. They've been around for more than you.
Do you acknowledge that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a role. It's not about like me being superior than someone else. You're acting as a manager in this specific situation, but it's like 3 years time, you change company, maybe different roles. So at the end of the day, you have to be professional in the role you play, and like using, like someone more senior as a partner.
Oh my God, you guys are so much not working in politics. Amazing stuff. How do you get feedback about yourself? I asked that, how an engineer manager fits to the Spotify So Agile concept values.
Yeah, so, I mean, definitely,
I mean, you shouldn't be a dinosaur just because you're a manager.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we talk with agile coaches all the time. We work in a team, and agile coaches are part of like all the decisions that we make. They are part of like the tech management meetings that we do.
What's the biggest challenge working with them?
Definitely, especially for us, agile coaches, they don't have like people responsibilities. They are there for making general improvements across the squad, across the tribe, across the department. So sometimes, of course, there is an overlap because they look for improvements, and sometimes, you know, you're taking care of like something that you have one-on-ones with your report, and maybe the agile coach has got one-on-ones as well with the same report, and they've got other ideas. So there is a kind of overlap sometimes, but I think it's fair.
Sounds more like a tension.
No, it's fair.
It's not?
No, it's not. I mean, it can be a tension.
How do you work that out?
It can be tension. But I think it's fair, because at the end of the day, they just want to make improvements. And I don't care if, like, I mean, you have to have as an objective to make an improvement and to make things better. Whoever says and comes up with the idea. I know it can be challenging, because sometimes, you know, like, you're not the one with the idea, but as long as you have the objective of like fixing a problem, that works.
How do you maintain a close enough relationship with your direct reports when they are on many different teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I think that's the main challenge when you don't work with someone in a team. Like, how do you know what they do on a daily basis?
And how do you?
Right. So I ask feedback from anyone in the team that work with them. So I've got regular one-on-ones even with POs, with product owners, and other people in the team to ask feedback about those people. Sometimes I read PRs, like pull requests. Not all the time, but just to have an idea.
How do you pick who to ask? How do you pick who to ask?
Well, definitely product owners. They are the lead in the squad, so they have an idea of what people are doing. And other people in my team, I ask them during one-on-ones, how is Chris doing? How is Jason doing? And also, as I said, PRs. Reading PRs here and then, I think it's a sensitive thing to do. I mean, you have an idea. If you were a coder and you read code, you have an idea what people are doing, at least if they're following good practices, and you read the comments from other people. I never reply to any PR, but like if you read the comments and like the intensity of the comments, you get an idea.
There's one question somewhere down the bottom. Were you the best engineer on the team before you became the manager?
I was a good engineer, I think, but I'm not sure if I was the best. I mean, yeah. But I don't think I was the best. But I don't think it really matters. As long as you have other people that are good to do the job, and you can hire other people that they're. I mean, now I've got in my team people are like super good, and like they were better than me when I used to be a coder. So
I was more interested in the way you answer than what you answer. So thank you very much. That was very nice. Thank you. Give him a big applause.
Thanks.